I was sure that marriage was a partnership where two people supported each other. But over time, I started to feel like I was the only one truly putting in the effort. My name is Emily, I'm 29 years old, and I've been married to Alex for 5 years. When we first met, he seemed perfect, smart, charismatic, always knowing exactly what to say to cheer me up. We moved in together quickly, and 2 years later, we got married. I thought we would build a strong family, that he would be my partner in everything. But with each passing year, I felt more and more like I was in this marriage alone. At first, it was just small things. I cleaned, cooked, planned all our gatherings with friends, organized vacations. Alex always had an excuse: I get so tired at work, I have a lot of stress, I'm bad at planning. And I accepted it. I really believed that maybe it was just easier for me to handle these things than for him. But then I noticed it wasn't just about household chores. It was about our conversations, our communication, our life together. If I had a rough day and wanted to talk to him to feel supported, he either wasn't listening or would say something like, "Oh, I had a tough day too." But when he had a bad day, I would sit beside him, listen, support him, help him find solutions. On our 5th anniversary, I realized Alex hadn't even tried to make the day special. I booked a table at a restaurant, bought him a gift, wore my best dress. And him? He just came home from work, didn't even ask how my day was, and kept checking his phone during dinner. I tried talking to him about it. "I feel like I put more into this relationship than you do," I told him one night. He just shrugged. "You're overthinking things." But I knew I wasn't. I wasn't imagining it. One evening, I came home from work and found him on the couch with his best friend, Jay. They were drinking beer, laughing, and when I asked why he hadn't bought the milk I asked for that morning, he just waved me off. "Oh, I forgot." I sighed, grabbed my jacket, and went to the store myself. But as I walked, I felt anger boiling inside me. I started noticing more. Alex had time for his friends, for video games, for the gym. But for me, he never had the time or energy. When my mom got sick, I had to visit her almost every day after work to help her with cooking and cleaning. Alex never once offered to help. Even when I came home exhausted, he just sat on the couch and asked, "What's for dinner?" That day, for the first time, I seriously asked myself, what if I was wrong? What if this marriage had been one-sided for a long time? A few weeks later, something happened that made everything clear. I found Alex's texts with his coworker, Sophie. They weren't outright romantic, but she shared her problems with him, and he sent her long, supportive replies, gave her advice. He had never done that for me. I closed his phone and felt a wave of emotions crash over me. I wasn't sure if I felt more anger or disappointment. That night, I didn't say anything. I wanted to see how he would act moving forward. And he didn't change. He kept forgetting our plans, ignoring how hard things were for me, but he always had time for others. But the worst was yet to come. One day, I came home earlier than usual. As I walked into the apartment, I heard laughter. A woman's laughter. My heart started pounding. I stepped into the hallway, and the first thing I saw was a woman's jacket that I had never seen before. I walked into the living room. Alex was sitting on the couch, and next to him was Sophie. They were drinking wine and chatting excitedly. When he saw me, his face changed. "Oh, you're home early." Sophie glanced at me and must have sensed the tension. I should probably go," she said, standing up. I didn't say anything until she left. What was she doing here? I finally asked. "We were just talking," Alex said, not even trying to look guilty. "Talking? Funny, I thought you forgot how to do that. At least with me." He just sighed. "Emily, you're overreacting." That sentence was the final straw. I silently turned and walked to the bedroom. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing. I couldn't do this anymore. I had been hinting at our anniversary for weeks. Not subtly, either. I practically spelled it out for him. I mentioned how special the day was to me, how much I was looking forward to celebrating 5 years together. I even brought up restaurants I'd love to go to, little things I thought would spark some sort of recognition in him. But Alex, he barely reacted. He'd nod absent-mindedly, mumble something like, "Yeah, sounds nice," and then go back to whatever he was doing, usually scrolling through his phone or watching TV. I told myself he had a plan. He must have been pretending to forget just to surprise me later. That had to be it. The morning of our anniversary, I woke up before him, excited despite my doubts. I lay there for a moment, waiting for him to stir, maybe turn over and wish me a happy anniversary. But he just snored lightly, his arm thrown across my side of the bed. I got up, went to the kitchen, and made coffee. I kept checking my phone, expecting a message from him, maybe something sweet or a clue about what he had planned. Nothing. I heard him shuffle into the kitchen, stretching as he yawned. "Morning," he said groggily. I smiled, waiting for the words. The two simple words. Nothing. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. "Morning," I replied, watching as he grabbed a coffee mug and sat at the table, scrolling through his phone as he sipped. I stared at him for a moment. "So, big day today," I said carefully. He glanced up, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, what's happening?" I swear I felt my heart sink to my stomach. My face must have given something away because he suddenly looked unsure. "Wait, am I forgetting something?" I waited. I gave him a chance. I let him reach the realization himself. He didn't. He just shrugged. "I don't know. What is it?" I let out a breathy laugh, shaking my head. "It's our anniversary, Alex." His eyes widened for a split second, and then nothing. No guilt, no apology, just another shrug. Oh, right. Well, happy anniversary. That was it. No, I'm so sorry. No, let me make it up to you. Just a lazy, half-hearted acknowledgement. I turned away, gripping the counter to steady myself. I had planned for this. I had tried so hard to make this day special, and he had completely forgotten. Still, I clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, he had something planned for later. Maybe he was just pretending, waiting for the right moment to surprise me. So I got dressed in my favorite outfit, did my hair, put on makeup. I made myself look like I was going on a date. When I stepped into the living room, Alex was sitting on the couch, playing a video game. He glanced at me. Going somewhere? I felt a sharp sting in my chest. I thought we might go out for dinner, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. He groaned. Ugh, babe, I had a long day at work yesterday. Can we just chill at home? Alex, it's our anniversary. And? Can't we just order takeout or something? I stood there, staring at him, hoping, begging, that he would realize how much this meant to me. He didn't. I grabbed my purse. Fine. I'll go celebrate alone. He barely looked up. You're being dramatic. I walked out the door. I didn't have a plan. I just started walking, my heels clicking against the pavement, my mind racing. How had I ended up here? In a marriage where I felt invisible? I ended up at a small bar a few blocks away, a place I used to love before I met Alex. I ordered a drink, sat at the counter, and stared at my reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Rough night, a voice asked beside me. I turned to see a man about my age, well-dressed, dark hair neatly styled. He had a kind face, but I wasn't in the mood for small talk. Something like that, I said. Celebrating alone, he asked, nodding toward my dress. I let out a humorless laugh. Apparently, he hesitated before saying, not to pry, but if a guy let you sit at a bar alone looking like that on your anniversary, he's an idiot. I looked at him startled. He raised his hands. Sorry, that was out of line. No, I said, shaking my head. You're right. And suddenly, I couldn't stop talking. I told this stranger everything. The forgotten anniversary, the lack of effort, the way Alex made me feel like I was the only one trying. By the time I finished, my drink was empty, and I felt strangely lighter. You deserve better, he said simply. I knew that, but hearing it from someone else made it real. I went home that night and found Alex still on the couch, still playing video games. He didn't even glance up when I walked in. Have fun, he asked. I stared at him, at the man I had spent 5 years with, and realized something. I was done waiting for him to care. I stared at my phone screen, reading Alex's message over and over again. Alex, landing at 7:45. Beef there. There was no please, no, thank you, no acknowledgement that I might have plans of my own or that picking him up was a favor, not an obligation. He didn't ask if I was available, didn't consider that I might be tired, busy, or simply not in the mood to drive all the way to the airport at night. He just expected me to be there, like I always was, because that's how our relationship worked. Alex took, and I gave. For weeks, I had been drowning in resentment, suffocated by the weight of his indifference, watching as he forgot our anniversary, dismissed my feelings, and treated me like an afterthought. And now he wanted me to drop everything and rush to the airport just because he decided I should? A bitter smile curled at the corner of my lips as I realized that, for the first time, I had the power to make him feel what I had felt for so long. Forgotten. Unimportant. So I made my decision. I wasn't going. At exactly 7:45, as Alex's plane was touching down on the runway, I was sitting in my favorite cafe, sipping a vanilla latte, scrolling through my phone, and deliberately ignoring the notifications popping up on my screen. By 8:15, I had 3 missed calls. By 8:30, the texts started flooding in. Alex, where are you? Alex, did you forget? Alex, Emily, I swear to God, answer me. I glanced at the screen, watching the messages pile up, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction as I pictured him standing at baggage claim, looking around, checking his phone every few seconds, waiting for me to show up. He had done this to me countless times, ignoring my texts, dismissing my concerns, leaving me feeling unimportant while he went about his life without a second thought. Now it was his turn. By 9 o'clock, the texts had shifted from confusion to anger. Alex, are you serious right now? Alex, you're doing this on purpose, aren't you? Alex, this is so fucking petty, Emily. I took another slow sip of my latte, letting the warm bitterness settle on my tongue as I stared at my phone, debating whether or not to reply. Instead, I turned my notifications off and leaned back in my chair, enjoying the quiet. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control. At 9:45, I finally decided to check my phone again. The calls had stopped, the texts had dried up, and I could only assume that Alex had finally given up and taken a cab home. I finished my drink, took my time leaving the cafe, and casually strolled back to my car, feeling no rush, no guilt, and no obligation to cater to him the way I always had. By the time I walked through the front door at 10:30, Alex was already there, sitting on the couch, his jaw clenched, his fingers gripping his phone so tightly I half expected him to crush it. His suitcase was still by the door, his coat tossed carelessly over the armrest, and his entire body radiated frustration. The moment he saw me, he shot up from the couch, his eyes burning with fury. Are you out of your goddamn mind? His voice was sharp, barely controlled, vibrating with restrained anger. I calmly dropped my keys on the table and shrugged off my coat as if his rage didn't faze me in the slightest. Good to see you too. His nostrils flared as he ran a hand through his hair, his frustration mounting by the second. Don't start with that bullshit, Emily. You knew I needed a ride. I arched an eyebrow, feigning innocence as I stepped past him and walked into the kitchen, opening the fridge as if I hadn't just left him stranded at the airport. Needed? Alex, there are taxis. Ubers. Public transportation. I'm pretty sure you didn't sleep at the airport. That's not the fucking point, he snapped, following me into the kitchen, his voice rising. The point is that you ignored me. On purpose. I turned to face him, leaning against the counter with my arms crossed. Huh. That must have been really frustrating. His mouth opened slightly as if he had something to say, but for a brief second, he hesitated, caught off guard by my words. But just as quickly as the hesitation appeared, his anger returned, stronger than before. This is bullshit, Emily, he growled, his hands balling into fists at his sides. You're punishing me for no reason. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh, shaking my head as I stared at him in disbelief. No reason? Are you seriously that clueless, or are you just pretending? His eyes darkened, his jaw tightening as he let out a slow breath, clearly trying to keep his temper in check. I don't have time for your games. Just say whatever the hell you're trying to say. I stepped closer, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. Fine. You forgot our anniversary. You make no effort in this relationship. You brush me off constantly, ignore my feelings, and make me feel like an afterthought. And now that I've given you a small taste of your own medicine, suddenly, it's a big deal. His expression flickered, the briefest moment of guilt flashing across his face before he shook his head, shoving it away. That's different. I scoffed, crossing my arms tighter. Of course it is. When I feel like crap, I'm being dramatic. But when it happens to you, it's the end of the world. He let out a sharp exhale, pinching the bridge of his nose as he muttered something under his breath. You're acting insane. I tilted my head, studying him, feeling the last remnants of patience drain from my body. No, Alex. I'm acting like someone who's finally had enough. I'm tired of waiting for you to care. You only notice when it affects you. His silence was deafening. For the first time, he had no comeback, no excuse, nothing to deflect or twist into making me the bad guy. He just stood there, staring at me, his lips pressed into a tight line, his breathing heavy. Then, without another word, he grabbed his coat off the couch, yanked his suitcase toward the door, and stormed out, slamming it behind him with enough force to rattle the walls. And as I stood there in the silence he left behind, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. I felt free. Alex had been distant ever since I left him stranded at the airport. At first, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd take some time to reflect, realize why I did it, and acknowledge his part in all of this. But, of course, that didn't happen. Instead, he buried himself in excuses, using work as both his shield and his sword. I've been under so much pressure lately, he said one evening as I stood in the kitchen, washing dishes while he scrolled through his phone at the dining table. I don't think you understand how demanding my job is right now. I set a plate down a little harder than necessary. Oh, believe me, Alex, I understand. I understand because it's the only thing you ever talk about. It's your go-to excuse for everything. He sighed heavily, as if I were being unreasonable. I'm not making excuses, Emily. It's just been hectic. I can't keep up with everything, and sometimes things slip through the cracks. I turned to face him, drying my hands on a towel. Funny how it's always me that slips through the cracks. He looked up from his phone, his expression unreadable. That's not fair, isn't it? I asked, crossing my arms. You forgot our anniversary. You dismiss my feelings. You never make time for me. And when I finally decide I'm done being ignored, you get mad. Where's the fairness in that? Alex groaned, rubbing his temples. I don't have the energy for this right now. And just like that, the conversation was over. He went back to scrolling, and I went back to pretending I wasn't furious. Days passed, and the tension between us only grew. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was short and clipped. Every time I tried to bring up the way I felt, he deflected, brushed it off, or acted like I was being unreasonable. Then, to make matters worse, his mother got involved. I was in the middle of cleaning the living room when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and hesitated before answering. Hi, Diane, I said, forcing a polite tone. Emily, she greeted me warmly, but there was an edge to her voice. I just had the most interesting conversation with Alex. He tells me there's been some tension between you two. I clenched my jaw. Of course, he ran to his mother instead of actually addressing the problem. We've been having some issues, yeah. There was a pause, and then Diane sighed. Sweetheart, I know my son can be a little thoughtless at times, but he's a good man. He works hard, and sometimes he gets distracted. You have to be patient with him. I nearly laughed. Patient? Diane, I have been patient. 4 years. But it's always the same thing. Work, stress, excuses. Meanwhile, I'm left feeling like I'm in this marriage alone. Marriage isn't easy, she said in that condescending way people do when they think they're giving sage advice. You have to compromise. Sometimes you have to be the bigger person. Of course, I had to be the bigger person. It was never Alex. I gripped the phone tighter. I'm always the bigger person. When does he have to be? Diane exhaled, and I could practically hear the disapproval in her voice. Emily, I'm just saying, if you keep making a big deal out of small things, you're going to push him away. I pressed my lips together, willing myself to stay calm. Right. Thanks for the advice, Diane. I hung up before she could say anything else. That night, Alex came home and acted like nothing had happened. He kissed my cheek, asked what was for dinner, and sat down to watch TV. And I realized something. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was exhausted. Then, suddenly, he decided he wanted to fix things. Or at least, he wanted to look like he was fixing things. Let's go to dinner, he said one evening, out of nowhere. I know things have been rough between us. Let me make it up to you. I was skeptical, but a part of me wanted to believe he was finally making an effort. Okay. Where? There's this new steakhouse downtown, he said, checking his phone. I heard it's really good. I stared at him, waiting for the realization to hit. It didn't. You do remember I don't eat steak, right? I asked. Alex blinked, as if the thought had never crossed his mind. Well, they probably have salads or something. I should have said no. I should have told him to forget it. But I was too tired to argue. So I just nodded. Fine. Whatever. When we got to the restaurant, I wasn't surprised when he didn't even ask if I liked anything on the menu. He just ordered his steak, assumed I'd figure something out, and then launched into a full monologue about work. The new project has been a nightmare, he said between bites. I had to redo an entire presentation because Greg completely screwed up the data analysis. I swear I don't know how that guy still has a job. I poked at my overpriced salad, barely listening. And then, on top of that, I had to deal with last-minute changes from the client. You wouldn't believe the amount of stress I've been under. I let him talk. I didn't nod, didn't make encouraging noises, didn't engage at all. And he didn't even notice. Halfway through dinner, I set my fork down and stared at him. Do you even know why we're here? I asked. Alex glanced up confused. What do you mean? I mean, do you know why you asked me to dinner? Because it sure as hell doesn't feel like it. He frowned. I wanted to do something nice for you. I let out a humorless laugh. Really? Because so far, this has been exactly like every other night. You talk about work. I sit here, feeling like I don't exist. His expression darkened. That's not fair. There it is again, I muttered, shaking my head. That's not fair. You love saying that, don't you? But tell me, Alex, what is fair? Is it fair that I have to practically beg for your attention? Is it fair that you treat me like an afterthought? His jaw tightened. Emily, you're blowing this out of proportion. I laughed, shaking my head. No. I'm finally seeing things for what they are. For the rest of dinner, we barely spoke. He finished his steak in silence. I had barely touched my food. And when the check came, I didn't even wait for him. I stood up and walked out. I didn't care if he followed me. I didn't care what he thought. Because at that moment, I realized something. This wasn't going to get better. Not really. And maybe deep down, I already knew what that meant. I used to think that the real issue was the forgotten anniversary, that maybe if Alex had just remembered that one important date, things would have been different. But the more time passed, the more I realized it wasn't about one day. It was about everything. It was about the way he dismissed my feelings. The way he made excuses instead of taking responsibility. The way I always had to be the one to compromise, to adjust, to make things work while he coasted through our marriage without a second thought. The forgotten anniversary was just the symptom. The disease was his indifference. Once I saw it for what it was, I couldn't unsee it. I started to pull away without even realizing it. I spoke less, stopped initiating plans, and quit reminding him of things he should remember on his own. If he didn't ask about my day, I didn't tell him. If he forgot something important, I didn't remind him. I let the silence grow between us. Let him feel what it was like when someone stops trying. And the worst part? He didn't even notice. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was exaggerating how bad it had gotten. But then my friends started to notice. One night, I was at dinner with Claire and Rachel, two of my closest friends. We hadn't gone out together in a while, and I was grateful for the distraction. But it didn't take long for them to pick up on my mood. You've been quiet, Claire said, studying me over the rim of her wine glass. Everything okay? I forced a smile. Yeah, just tired. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Tired or avoiding talking about Alex? I sighed, swirling my drink in my glass before setting it down. It's complicated. Claire leaned forward. Emily, come on. We've known you forever. We can tell when something's wrong. I hesitated for a moment before finally saying, it's like I don't exist to him anymore. Rachel frowned. What do you mean? I let out a small, humorless laugh. I mean, I could disappear tomorrow, and I don't think he'd even notice. He forgot our anniversary. I tried to talk to him about it, and all he did was make excuses. He's always too busy or too stressed to make an effort, but somehow he's never too busy for anything he wants to do. Claire and Rachel exchanged a glance. That's not okay, Claire said finally. You deserve better than that. I let out a slow breath. I know. And I did know. But knowing and doing something about it were two different things. A few days later, I found out just how little I really mattered to him. I was cleaning up the living room when I saw his laptop open on the coffee table. He had left it on, and the screen was glowing with his calendar app. I glanced at it without thinking, but then something caught my eye. A weekend trip. My stomach twisted as I stepped closer, reading the details. It was a trip with his friends, 3 days at a cabin by the lake. I had no idea he had planned it. I scrolled through his calendar, my pulse quickening. He had marked the trip weeks in advance, added reminders, even scheduled time off work. He had planned every detail carefully. I kept scrolling. And then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Our anniversary was marked too. It was right there on his calendar, clearly labeled, with a notification set to remind him a week before. And yet, he had still forgotten. He had seen it, been reminded of it, and still dismissed it as if it didn't matter. My hands trembled as I shut his laptop. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. I had spent so much time hoping that Alex would wake up one day and realize what he was doing to me, to us, that he would suddenly see how much I was hurting, how invisible I felt, how exhausting it was to be in a marriage that felt completely one-sided. But no matter how many chances I gave him, no matter how many times I tried to explain what I needed, he never seemed to hear me. And after finding that calendar entry, after realizing that he had remembered our anniversary, had marked it, had set a reminder for it, and still somehow chose to forget, it finally clicked that I wasn't going to wait anymore, that I was done crying over this marriage, that I was done making excuses for him in my head, and that if I wanted change, I was going to have to demand it, and if I didn't get it, I was going to leave. The thought sent a strange mix of emotions through me, sadness and relief intertwining with fear and strength, but above all else, I felt clarity, a sharp, undeniable certainty that I couldn't keep going like this, that something had to change or I would walk away. So that evening, I waited for Alex to come home from work, sitting at the dining table with my hands clasped in front of me, rehearsing everything I needed to say, preparing myself for every excuse he was bound to throw at me, reminding myself over and over again that this wasn't just another argument, that I couldn't let him deflect or brush it off. And when I finally heard the front door open, when I heard him drop his keys on the counter and head toward the fridge without even glancing in my direction, I took a deep breath and steadied myself, knowing that there was no turning back now. "We need to talk," I said, my voice even but firm, and something in my tone must have caught his attention because he stopped with his hand on the fridge handle, hesitating for a moment before slowly turning to face me. His brow furrowed slightly as he studied my expression, and when he saw that I wasn't going to let this go, he let out a quiet sigh, shut the fridge without grabbing anything, and walked over to the table before lowering himself into the chair across from me with a cautious look in his eyes as he leaned back slightly, folded his arms over his chest, and said, "Okay, about what?" I met his gaze without flinching, refusing to let him downplay this, refusing to let him shift the conversation away from what actually mattered, refusing to let him make me feel like I was being irrational for needing something more than the scraps of attention he gave me whenever it was convenient for him. So I exhaled slowly and said, "About us," and I saw the way his shoulders tensed, the way his fingers tapped against his arm as if bracing himself for a fight. But for the first time, I wasn't interested in fighting. I was interested in clarity, in giving him one final chance to either step up or let me go. Because I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep feeling like I was the only one who cared enough to try. So I looked him straight in the eye and said, "I'm not happy, Alex, and I haven't been for a long time." He sighed heavily, rubbing a hand over his face before leaning forward slightly as if already preparing his defense. And just as I expected, the first words out of his mouth were, "Emily, we've been through this before. Things have just been stressful lately, work has been." But I didn't let him finish because I already knew where this was going. I already knew the cycle. I already knew that this was the part where he would go on about deadlines and demanding clients and sleepless nights as if that somehow justified making me feel like I was invisible. So I held up a hand to stop him, my voice sharper now as I said, "No, I'm done listening to excuses. I'm done pretending that this is just about work, because it's not, Alex. This is about you, about how you treat me, about how little effort you put into this marriage, about how you make me feel like I don't matter, and I need you to hear me this time." For a moment, he just sat there, staring at me like he didn't recognize the person sitting across from him, and maybe he didn't. Maybe he had convinced himself that I would always be the same Emily, the one who forgave and excused and waited and hoped, but I wasn't her anymore. So when he finally nodded and said, "Okay, I'm listening," I took another deep breath, gripping the edge of the table to keep my hands steady as I said, "I don't feel like your wife anymore. I feel like a roommate. I feel like someone who exists in the same space as you but isn't really seen. I feel like I could disappear tomorrow and you wouldn't even notice, and don't tell me that's not true. Don't tell me I'm exaggerating, because I've lived it, I've felt it, and I'm tired, Alex. I'm so tired of trying to be enough for someone who can't even see what he has." His expression flickered with something I couldn't quite place, guilt, maybe, or regret, but he still looked like he wanted to argue, like he wanted to tell me that I was wrong, that I was being unfair, that I was making a big deal out of nothing. But before he could say anything, I pushed forward, my voice unwavering now as I said, "I can't do this anymore, Alex. I won't keep begging for your attention. I won't keep settling for a husband who treats me like an afterthought. So this is it either. Things change, really change, or I'm done." His head snapped up at that, his entire body stiffening as he processed what I had just said, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw something I had never seen before, fear, real. Genuine fear flashing in his eyes as he leaned forward abruptly and said, "Wait, what do you mean, done?" And I swallowed hard before forcing myself to say the words I had been too scared to say for so long. The words that sealed the fate of whatever happened next. The words that would either make him wake up or prove that he never would. And I said, "I mean I'll leave." His entire face changed in that instant, his jaw tightening, his hands gripping the table as if he could physically hold me there, as if he could stop me from slipping away just by willing it not to happen. But I saw the panic in his eyes, the realization, the weight of my words sinking in, and for the first time, he looked lost, like he had never actually considered the possibility that I would walk away. Like he had never really believed that he could lose me. Like he was only just now understanding that his actions had consequences, and he shook his head quickly, his voice quieter now, almost desperate as he said, "Emily, come on, you don't mean that." But I nodded, my throat tight, my hands trembling as I whispered, "I do." For the first time in years, Alex had nothing to say. And in that silence, I realized something. I had finally been heard. I had given Alex my ultimatum, and for the first time in years, I saw something crack in him, something that made me think. Maybe he finally understood. But I wasn't naive enough to believe that words alone meant anything. I had heard promises before. I had listened to apologies that led nowhere. I had spent years accepting excuses. This time was different. This time, I wasn't waiting for him to change. I was waiting to see if he could. And if he couldn't, I was ready to walk away. It was a strange feeling, this sense of control I suddenly had over my own happiness. For so long, I had been clinging to a version of our marriage that only existed in my head, hoping that if I just loved him enough, if I just tried hard enough, things would eventually shift. But now, I wasn't willing to put in all the effort alone. If Alex wanted to fix this, he had to prove it. And if he didn't, well, I had already made peace with what came next. At first, he seemed to be making an effort. The day after our conversation, he came home earlier than usual with takeout from my favorite Thai place. He set the bag on the counter and awkwardly cleared his throat. "I thought we could have dinner together," he said, watching me carefully. "Actually, sit down and talk." I studied him for a moment, trying to gauge if this was real or just a temporary reaction to his fear of losing me. "All right," I said finally, taking the plates down from the cabinet and setting them on the table. To my surprise, the conversation wasn't forced. He asked about my day, not in that absent-minded way he used to, but like he actually cared. When I mentioned a difficult client at work, he didn't brush it off or compare it to his own problems. He just listened. It was such a small thing, but it felt monumental. I wanted to believe this was a turning point, but I wasn't going to let myself get swept up in one good night. One dinner didn't erase years of feeling neglected. The real test came later that week. Claire and Rachel had been checking in on me constantly since I told them about my ultimatum. They wanted to know if Alex was actually following through, or if he was just doing the bare minimum to keep me from leaving. I had been honest with them. I wasn't sure yet. So when they invited me out for drinks on Friday, I said yes. I didn't even think to ask Alex if he had made plans for us, because, well, he never did. But as I was getting ready to leave, he walked into the bedroom and frowned when he saw me slipping on my heels. "Where are you going?" "Out with Claire and Rachel," I said, grabbing my purse. He hesitated. "I thought we could do something tonight." I turned to look at him, my eyebrow arching slightly. "Oh? What were you thinking?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know. Dinner maybe." I let out a small sigh. "You didn't make plans, Alex. You just assumed I'd be here. If you want to spend time together, you need to actually put in the effort." His jaw tightened, and I could see that old defensive side of him creeping back in. "I am putting in effort." "Not enough," I said simply. There was a time when I would have caved, when I would have canceled my plans just to avoid making him upset. But I wasn't doing that anymore. I walked past him and out the door. I wasn't trying to punish him. I was showing him that I wasn't going to rearrange my life for someone who didn't do the same for me. I expected him to sulk or lash out when I got home later, but to my surprise, he was quiet, thoughtful. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. I found Alex standing at the counter, flipping through a notebook with a concentrated expression. When he saw me, he closed it quickly and pushed a cup of coffee toward me. "What's that?" I asked, nodding toward the notebook. He hesitated for a second before exhaling and sliding it across the counter. I've been writing some things down." I opened it, flipping through the pages. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking at, but then I saw the dates, the small notes scribbled in the margins, reminders of things I had mentioned in passing, things that mattered to me. He had written down my favorite flowers, my go-to coffee order, the names of books I had talked about wanting to read. He had even marked upcoming events, Claire's birthday, my mom's next doctor's appointment, the date of an art exhibit I had once said I'd love to go to. I looked up at him, feeling something inside me shift. "You're keeping track of things?" He nodded, rubbing his hands together. "I don't want to forget anymore." I swallowed hard, staring at him. This is a start, Alex. For the first time, I felt something close to hope. But I wasn't foolish enough to think that everything was magically fixed. Over the next few weeks, I watched carefully. Some days, he seemed genuinely committed to changing. He planned date nights. Not perfect ones, but real ones. He made an effort to ask about my day and actually listen to my answers. He left me little notes on the fridge, small reminders that he was thinking about me. But then there were other days. Days when he slipped into old habits, when he got caught up in work and forgot to check in, when I still felt like an afterthought. And I realized that no matter how much he changed, I had changed too. I wasn't waiting for him to save this marriage anymore. I wasn't waiting for him to make me happy. I was taking control of that myself. So I gave him a chance, but it was on my terms now. I wasn't staying because I was afraid to leave. I wasn't staying because I thought I couldn't do better. I was staying because I wanted to see if he was truly capable of change. And if he wasn't, then I was ready to walk away.